So we left off yesterday on number 5, right? And we found this equation using the regression feature in our calculator, all right? So what I want to do is I want to go backwards, and I want to do the same thing with number 4, and then I want us to compare and see how good we did, right, as opposed to the calculator, and see how close it is, and give us a little bit more practice with the calculator. So we're going to grab our graphing calculator, and I'm going to show you how to clear a list. So first thing we want to do is we want to go to Stat, right, because that's where we put in points, and we want to go to the Edit. So we'll press Enter for Edit, and there's already some data in there, correct? So what we want to do is we want to get that data out. Now you can type over it, but I want to show you how to clear a whole list. So to clear a list, you're going to go up to the list name. So right now you should be up here on the list name, and you're just going to press clear. Don't press delete. That takes out the whole list. Just press clear, and notice that nothing happened. Do we see that nothing happened? But when I push down to go back into my table, all of those numbers are going to disappear. And then I'm going to do that to my other list. So go up to the list name. You're going to press clear, and then you're going to pop down, and you should have nothing in that. Now I'm going to go through and put all of my X values. So remember in your table, you're just going to go left to right for your X values and left to right on your Y values, and you're going to put those in your list. So remember, X's go in list 1, Y's go in list 2, and make sure you press enter after every single entry. So an important thing, and this kept happening in another hour yesterday, was that people didn't realize that they weren't even on the data. See how I have just as many X values as I have Y values? If you don't, let's say that maybe the 5 ended up here, that means you missed something somewhere, right? And when you try to graph them, it's going to give you a point, and it'll say like your dimensions are off or something like that. So make sure that you have the same numbers in both. Okay, and then remember we already turned our plot on, so we don't have to worry about that. But if you ever, haven't turned your plot on, you can always go to the Y equals up here and just make sure that the plot is highlighted in black, right? So you want to make sure, go to the Y equals, make sure your plot is highlighted in black. If you have any kind of equation right here, take that out. So just press clear. It will take it out. All right, so now we're telling our calculator, hey, I got some plots to point. So make sure that that's highlighted. And then if we want to see the points, we're going to have to change our window, right? So we're going to go to Window, and we're going to look at our table. And this should be correct, I think, because we fixed it yesterday, but we're just going to go through it. So our minimum X value right here is 0. So is that a little bit below our lowest X value in our table? Yes, because the lowest X value we have is 1, correct? And our highest X value is 10 for our window. Does that go above the highest X value from our table? Yes, because that was 8, right? Then we're going to count by ones, right? Your lowest Y value is 0. What's the lowest Y value in your table? 5. So that's a little bit below 5, right? And then your Y max in your table, your biggest one is 19, right? So we went up to 20. That's fine. You could have done 25, whatever. You always want to go a little below and a little above. And then you're going to go press graph so that you can see those points. So press graph. And we can see that they do kind of go down with a negative correlation, right? So now we're going to have our calculator make that equation for us. So we're going to go back to Stat. Remember, if we're doing anything with these, we're going to go to Stat. But this time we want to go to which menu? Calculate, because we're doing some calculations. So I'm going to go over. And then which option will I be choosing? 4, the linear regression. And remember, yours is going to look a little different than mine, right? You don't have this, so go ahead and press enter. And then you should have something that looks like this, correct? All right, so they're telling us that our A value is this big long thing, but we're going to round that to -1.8. And then the B value, we're going to plug in 19.25. So I have y equals negative 1.8 plus 19.25. So the top one is the one we did by hand, right? The second one is what they showed in the calculator. How close were we? We were pretty close, right? So I think we did pretty good on that. This one is, I like that this doesn't have decimals, right? But could we easily have had a decimal? Yes. It just, depends on where we had drawn our line. So we're really close. When we're interpreting right now, though, we're going to end up, I'm going to use the one we did by hand, all right? So we're interpreting the slope and the y-intercept. So we had a line on here that went kind of like this, I believe. Let's see. Like this somewhere, right? Pretty accurate. Okay. So this number right here represents what part of your graph? The y-intercept. That's right here, correct? And on our graph we had sales, right? We didn't have a 0 there, but that's 0, correct? 3, blah, 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 blah. And then we counted by 2s, correct? 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. All right, so we had weeks, and then we had sales. All right, so on your graph, this represents the y-intercept. So what does this point right here mean? Zero weeks since its release, correct? And you have 20 million in sales, correct? Now I have a question. If it's 0 weeks since your release, right? 0 weeks since your release, what does that mean? Like, how can you have 20 million in sales if it's not been released yet? Can you? Yeah, but we're not, we're not talking like pre-orders, because to them that would be a sale, right? If you've pre-ordered. Okay, if it's been no time, that means it hasn't been released yet, so there's literally no meaning to that, right? There's no meaning. We have no meaning for that. So for the y-intercept, there is no meaning. Okay, you haven't sold anything yet, so and since this is actually talking about sales, like it's not like what you have in stock. Does that make sense? This is not stock numbers. This is sales. You haven't had any time to sell yet. All right, let's talk about the slope. So the slope is -2, right? Now remember, you're talking about sales in millions, correct? So what does that slope mean? It's going down to. It's going down to what? To $2 million. How often? Over 1, which is each week, right? So I lose 2 million, lose 2 million, lose 2 million. Are you with me here? Lose 2 million each week. So every week, my sales are decreasing by 2 million, right? So every week, sales decrease by 2 million. Does that make sense to everyone? Make that a fraction. If it's negative, that would be something that's decreasing, right? So if this is sales, your X value, which is the bottom, is your weeks, right? 2 million every week. Okay? So let's talk about interpreting on number 5. What does the y-intercept, I'm just going to draw kind of like a little sketch here. Okay? Doesn't have to be perfect. Your x-axis represented what? Years of experience, right? And we have no years, 1, 2, 3, correct? Okay. And then the y value represented your salaries, right? So this represents my salary. And your salary, I'm going to put this thing. This means that I'm not starting at an equal amount for the rest of it. So we'll start with 50. So 50, and then you had, we'll just go count by tens. 60, 70, 80. Okay? Or by fives. You can do by fives. By the way, someone asked that yesterday, and that was a good question because it actually showed that on these graphs. See how it puts that little like heartbeat looking thing? That's because it's saying it's skipping a bunch of stuff right here. So skipping a bunch of stuff and starting at 35, so it doesn't count the same as the rest of it, just so you guys know. It was a good question. All right, and then we know that we're starting at 47.9. This is our Y-intercept, correct? So that's about right here, and then it's going up, correct? 2.9 over 1, right? So let's start with the Y-intercept and what that means. What does this 47.9 represent on the Y-axis? How long have you been working? No years, right? You're just starting out. So it's like when I came here for the first time, right? So what does the 47.9 represent? How much I'm making in thousands of dollars, right? Before I've even, you know, had any experience under my belt. So you could say the salary for no experience is $47,900, and that's money, right? So let's say dollars. By the way, I'm going to point this out just because some of you may not realize where you should be putting your comma since this is a decimal. This is in thousands, right? So if I take 47.9 and I take that times 1,000, I get 47,900. Are y'all with me? The comma always goes where that decimal is. Are y'all with me on this? It's kind of like 1.5 million, you know, be 1,500,000. Okay, so let's talk about the slope. The slope is 2.9. Now in money, what would that represent? $2,900, right? So what's happening with the salary every year? It goes up $2,900 every year, right? So you could say salary increases. $2,900 every year. Remember, when you think about this, this is going to be money for this many years, right? Every single year. Money per year. Y'all got me on this? Okay. All right, so let's look at number 5. We're going to go ahead and do this one. In the table, we're showing the world birth rates in number of births per 1,000 people, X years since 1960. All right, so I'm going to put this on here just so we can kind of see what we're doing. So the x-axis represents years since 1960. So years since 1960. So I have a question. What would 0 represent? What year? 1960, because it has been no time since 1960, right? What would 1 year represent? 1 right here. 1961, right? And 2 would represent 1962, so on and so forth. And then Y represents birth rates, right? And that's in thousands, correct? Per 1,000 people. I better put per 1,000 people. Per 1,000 people. So for every 1,000 people, right, in 1960, because that's 0 years since 1960, correct? For every 1,000 people, there were 35.4 births. Y'all with me? So 10 years away from 1960, which would have been 1970, there were 33.6 births per every 1,000 people, right? What's happening the farther you get from 1960? They're decreasing, right? The births are decreasing for every 1,000 people. Interesting. That would be something to study right there. Okay, so we're going to write an equation, and we're going to use our calculator to do that. So your x values will go in list 1, and your y values will go in list 2. So in your calculator, what's the button you're going to press to get to the lists? Stat, and then you're going to choose Edit. Now, to clear this out, you're going to go up to the list title, and you're going to press Clear, but nothing's going to happen until you go back down into your table. Make sure you clear both lists out. And then you're going to go through again with your table, left to right for both of them, and insert that. So once we have our data in there, we want to be able to look at it, right, just to make sure that it is forming a line. I mean, if it's not going down in any kind of correlation, then you can't write an equation for it. But if we want to see this, first you got to make sure your plot's on, right? That's on the y equals. That should be on because we haven't turned it off, right? So it should be highlighted. And then what else do you have to adjust? Your window. So go to your window. So the x values in your table go from 0 to 50, right? So we want to start a little below 0, so maybe let's do -2. So here's also another lesson in your calculator. There is a difference between negative and a minus sign. So the minus sign is up here like with the plus, the multiplication, and division. The negative sign is down here on the bottom to the left of your enter. That's the negative. So if you would read and say, okay, I want to put a -2, then you're going to use the negative button, right? So I'm going to push -2. That starts us a little bit below 0. And then our maximum, we need to go above 50, correct? So let's go maybe to 55. Press enter, and we can count by ones. That's fine. So what do you think would be a good thing to start for on your y? What's your smallest y? 20, right? So maybe let's start at 15. And what's your biggest y value? 35.4, so maybe we go all the way up to 40. That'd be a good choice. And then if we want to look at it, we're going to go to the graph, right? All right. Does that look like something that's kind of going down in a negative correlation? Yes. So now we'll have our calculator write that equation for us. So where do we go to do that? Stat, and then what menu? Calculate, and then which option? 4. And then you're going to press enter. If you're on a TI 83, 84, you'll go all the way down to calculate. All right, so they tell us that the A value is -3.197142857. We'll just round that to, let's go a few in here. Let's go 4 over just to make sure it's accurate. So we'll do 3197 in front of our X, the negative. And then your B, we'll just go 2 after that. That should be good enough. 35.78. The reason I went more on this is because it's not even a whole, right? We're like less than 1. So negative 0.3197 x, right, plus, and then we have 35.78. Now, if we want to, every now and then we may have put some data in wrong or something happened, right? We always want to graph our line just to make sure that it really does go through those points. So go to your y equals, and we're going to graph what we just wrote down. So remember, if you would say a negative, you'll use the negative button. So you have negative 0.3197. And remember, your x is that number right next to your yellow second or alpha button. So x and then plus 35.78. Do what? Yeah, I rounded. All right, and once we get that in there, then where are we going to go to look at it? Graph. So do we feel like that's a good line of fit? Yes. If you'll notice, it kind of goes through this point and this point. There's two above, two below. I think it did a really good job. So we have a good equation. Now we're going to interpret our slope and y-intercept. So this is part B, slope and y-intercept. I like to start with the y-intercept, so let's do the y-intercept first. So your y-intercept was 35.4, right? Because x is 0 and this is at 35.4. By the way, I'm going to point this out. See how that's really close to 35.4? Okay. It's not going to be exact. Should it be 35.4? Yes, because that's what my data says. But we made a line of fit, right? Which doesn't mean it's actually going to go through that point right there. Are y'all with me? So, not 35.78. That is our y-intercept. What does that mean? We're 0 years since 1960, and this represents what? Birth rates. So what does this number mean? In 1960, there were 35.78 births per 1,000 people, right? So in 1960, there were, were 35.78 births per 1,000 people. Per 1,000 people. All right, and then you have your slope up here. How can we interpret that? What's happening every year? Births are decreasing by, now we could make this a percent, right? If you move a decimal 2 places to the right, that makes a percent, right? So you could say it's decreasing about 32% every year per 1,000 people, right? We could say it like that. It's kind of weird. You can't. Births are decreasing 0.329, 3197 every year. Kind of sounds funny, right? Normally, if you say that you're decreasing, you would use a percentage. So let's move this decimal place, and we'll say that this is about 32%, right? So you could say birth rates. I can't spell today, like at all. I also can't operate this thing. Birth rates are decreasing, and we'll say about because we rounded, right? And I've run out of room. 32% each year, right? per 1,000 people. I should have written that somewhere else so that it wasn't so cramped. That's messy. All right, so if they're asking, if it's like that, you know, and you don't even have a hold, then you could think about that.